Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today on the 8.1 PTR, you guys have requested that I take a look at the new Unholy Death Knight changes, both the PvP talents, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the new Azerite abilities that you guys will be getting in the near future. So, let's jump into this and do it.
It's who we are, it's what we do, we've come so far, and now we pay the price, so don't even cry. The world is breaking down, and I cannot leave the ground.
So the first thing we want to talk about with Unholy is we're going to be discussing an Azerite trait that probably surprised me more than just about any of the new Unholy DK increases and or buffs going on in 8.1. So I got the chest and shoulders of Hell Chains. Now basically Hell Chains is going to cause a chain between me and my ghoul, which is going to deal 527 fire damage to any enemies between me and my goofy ghoul. Now usually moving around a goofy ghoul, because he's not the brightest light bulb in the package, it's not very easy to do, but he does radiate around himself, and since as long as you place him in the right placement in the beginning, it's not going to be very hard. Generally what you want to do is place your ghoul on the target furthest away from you, so then when he kind of moves closer or he moves to the target that you're on, you're going to be kind of on the opposite side of the placement. So essentially what this ability is going to do is increase your DPS by about 10 to 15k, even 20k at some parts, from opener burst damage. That's going to take Unholy DK's opener burst, and it's going to put it up there with, I'd have to say, Demon Hunters, because it's that ridiculous inside of a Mythic Plus situation. So we're going to go ahead and start DPSing on these 4 targets with Hell Chains. Hell Chains is not, I mean, it looks cool, but it's not amazing. But what we're going to go ahead and do is pop our Unholy Frenzy on the target. We're going to go ahead and line ourselves over here. We're going to pop Unholy Frenzy. We're going to dot up the target. After that, we're going to use Dark Transformation to proc the chains between us and our ghoul. That's why you don't pre-pop ghoul, is because of Hell Chains, obviously. Now after that, we're just going to go ahead and dump as many Scourge Strikes and burst as many wounds on the target as we can. Now I'd say on average my DPS will reach about 40,000 with this build on the opener, and in the best times it'll reach about 54,000, which is a lot of AoE DPS for only 4 targets. I can imagine if you would do this on, you know, like 10 targets, you'd probably reach 100k. It's literally that strong. So we're going to go ahead and do on this target, obviously, is cast our Unholy Frenzy. We're going to dot the target, we're going to Transformation, and at that point is when we're going to drop D&D and start dumping our strikes. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to throw on Unholy Frenzy, we're dotting up the target, we're closing the gap, there's Transformation, there's D&D, and now we just dump out as many bursts as possible on all the targets in the vicinity. As you can see, we're pumping out about 50k DPS right there, and really just doing an insane amount of AoE pressure. Now Hell Chains itself, now we'll go ahead and pull that back. We'll see how much damage Hell Chains itself did in comparison to dots and things like that. As you can see, Hell Chains is all the way up there at the top with that OP fire damage coming through on all the targets. Now if we sat there and DPS for a bit, Hell Chains would drop down to about 2nd or 3rd, but it would stay within 2nd or 3rd because of course those are AoEing. Now single target, I wouldn't say Hell Chains is very good, but for overall Mythic Plus DPS, if you're pulling pulls, you know, 4 ads or bigger, this ability alone is going to be completely insane. The second Azerite trait we're going to be discussing is called Magus the Undead, which basically whenever you proc Apocalypse, it's just going to summon a little ghoul there that's going to cast Frost Bolts at the target, hitting it for roughly 1,620 damage. Now, if you use 2 pieces and you summon that for single target, it lasts as long as your other skeletons, obviously, and it's going to hit for about 4,000. Would I say this is necessarily a good buff or well increase? I wouldn't say Magus the Undead is necessarily gonna be good for Unholy DKs unless you're trying to time some kind of single target burst off of it or increase your single target DPS. But I really feel like in elongated fights, just because this only procs off of Apocalypse, it's not nearly going to be as effective in elongated raid fights as some of the other abilities that proc all the time. So really the only place I could see this being used or being effective is maybe inside of some kind of PvP situation where you're trying to apply a lot more single target pressure during your burst, and being that Unholy DKs in comparison to a lot of other classes don't necessarily have as much single target pressure, it could be a fairly large increase to your single target buff if you wanted to go down that road. Since it is a mage, it is a caster, chances are they're not going to peel it off very well. If it is killable, then it would, you know, it'd be a little bit harder to use correctly, because you're only going to get it 1.5 minutes you know, on rotation throughout the arena, throughout the fight. So that's an interesting little trait that increases your single target DPS, but outside of that, I don't really see it being that great. So let's go ahead and get into some of these PvP talents. Obviously, that's what everyone's waiting for. They want to know if Unholy's going to be strong, if these PvP talent changes are going to be good, and honestly, I could say they look to be pretty good. Now, a big change going on right now is Necrotic Strike, which is at 8% healing absorption. They increased it from 16% increase up to 30% increase, which was almost almost double for Necrotic Strike increase, which is going to make it a lot more powerful inside of PvP instances. And of course, anytime you're fighting a healer comp or a class that can heal quite a bit, it's going to come in handy, especially with the power that it's currently sitting at. Now, a direct change that came with 8.1 is the fact that you can drop D&D and the Necrotic Strike on a target to spread the Necrotic Strike to, of course, different targets. Now, that being said, we're going to go ahead and do that on these targets. We're not going to do anything fancy. We're going to run in, drop this ability. We're going to stack up some dots. We're going to throw down a D&D. We're, of course, going to transfer him across, and we're just going to drop some Death Strike. Now, as you can see, it's stacking up on the target, and I click the other targets, and there are Death Strikes stacking up on each target that has bursting pustules on him. Now, as we're looking through, Pestilence is going to directly affect that, because Pestilence is going to apply, again, any bursting wounds to any target within the vicinity. Now, up front, that doesn't necessarily sound like it would be very effective inside PvP. If you're thinking about twos, the chances of two people standing next to each other, not very good. If you're thinking about threes, you do have I'd say a bit more of a chance of people standing next to each other, especially if you're focusing the healer and you're facing some kind of melee comp and they're riding one of your DPS. It could affect all three targets at once and be very strong. That being said, could you imagine in a rated battleground where you have 10 players, you got 3 people trying to spin the flag, you got everybody in close, and a Death Knight drops that and somehow it hits all 10 people. Everyone starts getting pustules on them, and the Death Knight's just dropping death strikes on each target. He manages to put up about 50% of their health healing absorption on every target. And let's say that Unholy DK happens to be playing a rated battleground team that is a dot comp. The amount of AoE pressure that alone is going to be able to put out in comparison is a huge change day and night for Unholy DKs when it comes to very large team combat. Unholy, kind of like Frost, had a few abilities removed from their PvP talents. First one up is Crypt Fever. While enemies healed by your affected festering wounds have a chance to take shadow damage, which they took that out of the game. I can imagine that's being replaced with a new ability and a new PvP talent called Dark Bargain. I'll go ahead and put that talent on so we can take a look at it here. It is hiding over there. We need to be in a rest area. Here, I'm going to show you guys a trick real quick. If you're ever down here PvPing on dummies and you want to change your talents, stand on top of the barrels. The barrels, you can always change your talent standing on the barrels. I don't know why. It's like the barrels are sacred ground or something. See? The barrels. Anyways, so Necromancer's Bargain. We go ahead and use this ability. It's pretty interesting. The cooldown of your Apocalypse is reduced by 45 seconds, but your Apocalypse no longer summons ghouls, which your ghouls actually deal quite a bit of DPS. So I'm also wondering if that Azerite trait still works when you summon the mage, but for some reason I can't click on the Azerite trait to show you guys, otherwise I would. And so anyways, it reduces it by 45 seconds, which is a fairly large damage reduction, but it's going to apply an ability on the target, Crypt Fever, which deals 8%. This is where Crypt Fever ended up. 8% of the target's maximum health and shadow damage over 4 seconds. So, I mean, essentially it's like, what's that ability? Death Chill? A Death Chill? I should know what this is called. I should know what this is called in Frost. Anyways, so percentage damage. It's going to deal 8% of somebody's total health over 4 seconds. Now, healing spells cast on this target will refresh the duration of Crypt Fever. So essentially, whenever they get healed, when that's ticking down within those 4 seconds, it's going to reset. So if they keep getting healed, it's going to keep dealing percentage damage. It's about 2% health every second. So if 2 ticks go by, they get healed back to full. It's going to go back to 4 seconds again, and it's going to tick back down, and that's going to ramp up or stack up over time. if they can't see it. Like, it's one of those abilities that sounds good up front, but it's one of those abilities that somebody has to be dumb enough not to notice it, to keep healing through it, that causes somebody to die from it. So it's kind of like, I'd say the same as breath. Same as breath. Now I'm going to go ahead and use it on this target here. It'll probably affect him with Crypt Fever. I'm not 100% sure if this talent works here on PTR. Some of them are very finicky, kind of like the Azerite traits. And like, some of them work, but some of them don't work, so it's really questionable. Let's go ahead and put... Wow, that was a really fast 4 stacks. Wow. We're going to go ahead and use Apocalypse, and you see the effect has not went on the target. And of course, we have summoned up ghouls. So both of those are telling us that this current talent on PTR is not working. Now, there are a couple that are kind of like that, obviously. And let's go ahead and switch up to talking about Ghoulish Monstrosity here. Now, Ghoulish Monstrosity, basically whenever you used Army of the Dead, would combine each one of those goofy ghouls, and they would become one big bone ghoul, which would DPS on the target. And of course, if you were using Last Surprise, that guy would blow up for like 20 to 40k DPS, even higher before the last nerf. So what they did with that is pretty much removed Ghoulish Monstrosity from the game, and they added in a new talent that currently also does not work on PTR. I need to go back. Gotta go back to the barrels. Sacred barrels. Gotta go back to them. Raise Abomination, which essentially is gonna do, I'd say, close to the same thing that ability did. You just don't actually have to use it with Army. It does replace Army of the Dead. There you go. But it is a 1.5 minute cooldown, which it's fairly low, and obviously it looks like you can place him. You can tell him where you want to summon him, but currently on PTR this ability does not work. So as you can see, there's no big old abomination that we can look at. There's no big change going on right there, and that's kind of depressing that we can't see him right now, because I really wanted to see him. Next up, we got a new ability called Life and Death. Now, half of this is something that we've already had. It's in addition, your Plague now erupts for 400% normal eruption damage when dispelled. Very good for arena because people dispel the living crud out of your dots. Now, something that this does that I also find kind of new, which most likely does not currently work on PTR, is when targets afflicted by your Festering Strike are healed, you are also healed for about 15% of the amount. Now, I mean, all you pretty much got to do is hit somebody with your baseline ability that stacks up dots, and any healing that they receive during that time that your Festering is on the target, you're going to be healed for 15% of the healing done. That is insane tanky. That is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I can't wait to actually see this ability and test it out. But 15%, you imagine that 15% plus the buff that Unholy DKs and Frost DKs got to their recent Death Strike, and of course the new ability that Unholy DKs got called Transfusion, which really just blows my mind. Now, this ability, Transfusion, does work, which we can use, and basically what it does, it generates 20 runic power, so you can get up to 80 runic power with that, use that ability, and then runic dump your Death Strikes on a target, healing for quite a bit of damage. I mean, realistically, this should be close to a full health heal when you're able to dump that much on a target. So what you're going to go ahead and do on a target to use this completely, obviously, is stack up your runic power gain any way possible. It doesn't really matter which way you want to do it. And I'm up to, as you can see, 66 RP. Now, we're going to use this. That's going to bring us to about 88. We'll go ahead and actually cap it off a little bit. Now, we should be about 86, now, which is a little bit too high, but that's okay. We're going to pop Transfusion, which is going to reduce our Death Strike cost down to 7 runic power Death Strike, which is just completely insane in my opinion. We're going to go ahead and just throw it up. You should be able to use about 5 Death Strikes before the ability or the talent falls off, and then you go back to your normal rotation, kind of like it never existed. But it gives you a huge runic dump capability to do on an Unholy DK when you're taking a lot of damage, or to counteract burst. It's definitely a good talent. It's definitely solid for survivability, and it would definitely help keep you alive inside of arena or battleground or 1v1 situations, really. Another talent that was obviously removed, I can imagine you've seen that with the kind of picture on Life and Death up here, is Pandemic, which basically when you use Outbreak, all enemies within 25 yards affected by your disease take shadow damage, and the duration of your diseases are refreshed. So they went ahead and took that out of the game, which, I mean, that's kind of a big punch when it comes to AoE damage like rated battlegrounds and stuff, but I'd say it's definitely worth exchanging in consideration to the other talents that you've got going on. Now, The last PvP talent that was taken out of the game for Unholy DKs was Wandering Plague. Now, originally when the expansion first started, this was literally like the go-to damage talent when it came to Unholy DKs dealing an insane amount of pressure, which they absolutely nerfed this ability through the floor. And at this point, it's fairly useless in consideration to other talents that you could take. So they went ahead and just completely removed Wandering Plague out of the game. So realistically, how do I feel about the 8.1 changes coming to Unholy Death Knights? Now, honestly, I'm stoked. I'm extremely excited to see what Unholy DKs are going to turn into. But overall, it's very simple to see that with the extra 5% PvP buff that Unholy DKs are going to be receiving in 8.1, the overall healing increase of the Death Strike buff, which made it so we could Death Strike a lot more within our rotation instead of having to wait so long to do it, and of course, abilities like Transfusion that they've added in for Unholy DKs that are going to improve the survivability by quite a bit when it comes to Death Strikes. As you saw me using that ability, it made Death Strikes only cost 13 runic power, which you could pump out 5 consecutive Death Strikes in a row. That was not something that was even fathomable for an Unholy DK or a Frost DK previously before this buff. Now, obviously, with the baseline of this ability, you're still only gonna get like 3, maybe 2 in like 3/4 or something, but still you're gonna get very few Death Strikes even out of the stock in the way this is right now. And obviously with that ability, it's on a 45-second cooldown, so think about that. Transfusion is on a 45-second cooldown. It'll accumulate enough Death Strikes to counter burst. This survivability overload is on a total another level. You add that in with the damage increase of the other abilities plus the AoE increase on Necrotic Strike, Unholy is getting a savage buff. Now, in comparison to what it is currently on live to PTR, it really feels like a totally different spec. It feels like a totally different spec. Just strength alone, you could tell just by the pure abilities that they've buffed that Unholy DKs are going to be on a totally different level than what they were previously. And it almost feels like I can't fathom that much, and I really want to test it out and really get a feel for these abilities and see how well they do. But it's kind of hard, obviously, when a lot of them don't really work. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to do a quick update because a few of you have been messaging me and requesting that I go ahead and update Unholy DKs for you guys on the PTR and explain some stuff going on. So I hope you guys again enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, please. It'll help me out, guys. Comment if you have any questions or you want some future videos, let me know. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.